Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rob Litvak. It's my pleasure to chair this concluding panel. We've had a rich discussion over the last day, and the final session looks to the future, emerging roles, challenges, and prospects. We have a distinguished panel to introduce the topic and to launch a discussion in this group. Our first speaker is Dr. Rafael Grossi. He's ambassador of Argentina and permanent representative to international organizations in Vienna. He's had extensive experience in disarmament and non-proliferation affairs in his past roles as chair of the Nuclear Suppliers Group for 2 consecutive terms, chief of cabinet in the office of the Director General and Assistant Director General for Policy of the IAEA. He was chief of cabinet of the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, chair of the UN Group of Governmental Experts on the UN Register of Conventional Arms, and special advisor to the Undersecretary General for Disarmament Affairs at the UN. So with that, Ambassador Grossi, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Rob, for the introduction, Joe, and the rest of the team for the invitation, the opportunity to see so many friends and new friends as well, and continue learning. I think the last panel was yet another example of this possibility to get more information about things, and I understand yesterday as well was particularly rich. As you said, the panel today is forward-looking, and what I would like to do, or to try to do, is to share with you some thoughts about what we have in systemic terms for the agency, the environment surrounding what the agency does, what the challenges are, what possibilities, and perhaps roles that could be a bit too specific, but that could be attributed to it. In reality, when we look at the presentations we've had, you will see, and with good reason, that we have not been talking too much or listening too much to the agency specifically, but rather what's going on, and how what's going on influences the agency. The agency is our institutional vehicle to do many things. And as a vehicle, it can be informed by our actions and our omissions, and the possibilities that the instrument give us. So this is my perspective. In the past few years, we've seen lots of changes in the area, in the nuclear, if you want, in the nuclear agenda. When you look at the hard side of the agenda, the non-proliferation, disarmament, we've gone from war in Iraq, motivated originally at least by issues dealing with development of weapons of mass destruction, or rollbacks in Libya, or what happened in Syria, to Iran, on which my distinguished colleague here, Ali, Pierre as well, myself, were involved for many, many years until 2015, when we thought we got that one right. Now we don't know. This could change, but in any case, we've seen that there have been lots of development. The same can be said on the other aspect, which is perhaps less attractive to policymakers, analysts, and experts like us and like you in the room. It has to do with the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. We moved in the early 2000s from the idea that we were on the verge of a new nuclear renaissance to post accident, deep depression after Fukushima, and the possibility of that having been the swan song for nuclear energy. So in all these areas, we see that a lot can be said for the agency, what the agency did, what the agency could do, what the agency could have done. So let me take, to make my thoughts a bit orderly and to present them in a way that is clearer, let me take the issues or by issue and see how this could affect the agency, or what the agency could or should be doing. Let me start with one that has not been mentioned, at least extensively today at least, which I believe is very important and very crucial for the future of the agency. It has to do with nuclear safety, and in particular in the wake of the accident in Fukushima. Some were asking, I think Mark, you were asking, and you've been writing about this, what would happen, what would the agency do in the case of a nuclear security emergency? And I remember those days I was at the agency, and there was a lot of confusion on what the agency could or should be doing. I was fielding questions from journalists asking why is the agency not sending people, or why is the agency not doing this and that. Of course, there was part ignorance of what the mandate of the agency could be, but at the same time, I think there was a legitimate expectation that if you have such an instrument, such an agency working in Vienna, there should be some direct role in case of such an emergency. The thing is that the type of regime that the agency administers when it comes to safety, unlike safeguards, is that you have an incentive, soft kind of regime. Not as soft as the one on security, and I'll come back to this. So security is even softer, but this is pretty soft. It has to do with safety standards. They are very important. At least we do have the benefit of having a convention, the CNS, which is there and operating. After Fukushima, the system reacted in a way which was an attempt to try to change this convention, because it was felt that it wasn't giving us enough tools to act in case of such a problem, of such an emergency. And there was a proposal to amend the convention, which surprisingly was approved at a review meeting of the CNS, to the despair of many important countries, I would say, that felt that perhaps they were running the risk of being forced to do things that they would not necessarily like or feel important to do. Well, I had the privilege of presiding over a diplomatic conference that had to deal with this issue, and we solved it in a typically diplomatic way, a third way. So we didn't leave the CNS as it was. We didn't change it either. But we did something that I mentioned not because of an anecdote or a personal involvement. I mention it because I think it indicates the way in which things may evolve in certain areas, safety and security perhaps included. What we did was we approved a political declaration, the Vienna Declaration, not very original, the Vienna Declaration on nuclear safety, which provided for principles to design, construct, operate nuclear power plants in a way that would be consistent with the objective of avoiding nuclear accidents. But we didn't leave it at that. We said, this is what we politically agree, but you, us, we are accountable for this. It's not a simple incentive idea. And what we used was the existent regime of the CNS, which meets every with a certain periodicity. And we said, in our national reports, we are mandated to tell the others what we've done to implement this Vienna Declaration, to take steps in order to improve the safety situation in our countries. I mention this because I think there is a difference between a purely incentive mode and an incentive mode with accountability, which is basically what we try to do. Of course, these are gradual, incremental progress that can be operated and can be or should be perhaps replicated in other areas. There are always in the safety area, which I consider so relevant, there are other examples which indicate that not all is impossible, and consensus might be reached when there is a clear common objective. And again, I speak on the basis of experience because I had to broker and successfully agreed on a code of conduct very recently, a code of conduct on the use and the management of radioactive sources, a very important document which was orphaned in the board. We could not get agreement on that, and it was possible. It was possible to get American experts and Russian experts together because there was a common problem, and it was far worse not to have this code of conduct approved there than the prospect of not having it. So clearly, the margins have reduced, but not everything is lost. So then, an example in the area of safety. For security, I think after the formidable panel we had before, there's very little I could or should perhaps add. But one thing comes to mind. It is clear that we are dealing with what Ambassador Huland was describing as this post-NSS process and how to take it forward. I think one of the things we need to do is to perhaps stop thinking about enlarging the core of NSS countries and think of the agency security agenda. The more we continue saying that this is a group of enlightened people that are trying to bring and convince the others that we are the ones who are right, I think the longer it will take for this to be mainstreamed. I think we will have, perhaps with some cost to our pride or our memories, we will have to let the NSS rest and incorporate what it gave us, these 4 E's that Laura was explaining, that are there as a heritage for all of us. I think we have to think in terms of a different thing, of something that is not going to be the expanded NSS gospel, to something that is going to be the agenda of the agency. This will require different configurations. This will require consensus building in a different way that will perhaps have to come from the General Conference, resolutions, and other areas. But just a reflection. When it comes to safeguards, it's the same. I will not get into any technical aspect. I wouldn't dare with Ollie here sitting with me. But only to say that when it comes to safeguards, again, one has to think, and I'm saying this because I'm talking about the future and what is for us as a common mission in the future to do and for the agency to do. I think the important message that experience brings is that we have to work together. When we look at what was explained yesterday by Laura and others, we see that every time the agency, and when I say agency, I say it with a big A, I mean agency, member states, secretariat, everybody has worked together, there was success. And the additional protocol is a clear example of that. There was a clear program, there was a clear message, understandable for all, there was a mission, there was a case to be made which could be understood by all. Perhaps not all liked it, but it was a process which was clear. After that, we have never been in such a position. It's difficult, but it is clear that for the safeguards system to evolve, there needs to be joint work. It's not because a group of very knowledgeable people come together, write a paper and put it in front of the board, that the board is going to accept it. Rather, that's the recipe for exactly the contrary to happen. And we know that in recent years, we had those experiences. So it's very important to reconstruct this tissue of a common objective that needs to be there. I don't think anybody will be against a system that is more robust, that provides value for money, and that puts us in a better position to catch up in this unwinnable race of resources against nuclear material, which is absolutely impossible. We see these curves every time. Of course, the gap is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're never going to catch up, whatever millions we throw at the problem. So I think there is there a lesson to be learned, and I'm sure we are going to take good examples from the experts. The peaceful uses and the technical cooperation, that is another very important area. For some, the price we pay for safeguards. For others, the very raison d'etre of the agency. How do we reconcile this? And if I spoke about a gap in terms of resources, oh boy, when you come to DC, that's even worse, because the expectations are so much bigger. And what we have not been able to do is to be in a place where the TC projects are going to be done in a way which is structured in a coherent way and less driven by sometimes disconnected priorities between countries without regional consistent approaches. And since we speak about resources, there is a clear need there to once and for all have there what we've been having and benefiting from across the UN Common System for years, which is public-private partnerships. It's unbelievable, but we don't have that at the agency. It's only 3 years ago that a working group on financing the agency agreed to ask the Secretariat to work on it. We don't have a proper unit on. I know they're working on that, so I give praise for DG and the people who are working on that, but it's long overdue. It is very clear in every other energy sector, be it oil, gas, that there are many firms with resources, not only available but willing to play a role, to do something good in terms of nuclear medicine, nuclear applications, agriculture. So all of these things, I think, should be taken into consideration, and resource mobilization needs to be a central part of the debate in the future, and a tool, more than the debate, a tool, a concrete tool to do things when it comes to technical cooperation. There are also systemic issues, and I think member states as well need to revise the way in which this technical cooperation is demanded and delivered. As I said, small projects, unconnected, and without or with little structural influence in countries' nuclear programs are perhaps not the best idea. Lastly, a word on communication and the presence of the agency in the global conversation. I believe that the agency has been in splendid isolation for too long. It is one of the most respected institutions in the world, and rightly so, one of the few and for a reason where the United States decided not to cut from 25 to 22% of the assessed contribution when these cuts were decided back in the day. And I think this respect, this prestige is pretty much there. But I think society has changed. We've all changed. We live in a world where everything is known immediately and where we have to be open for conversation. There is a need to have systematic and regular contact with academia. There is a need to have regular and systematic contact with the World Nuclear Association, with the World Association of Nuclear Operators. When I was at the agency, we couldn't even agree on a calendar of activities with WANO. So this indicates how far behind we are lagging in terms of having this conversation. These days, I think today, COP23 opens in Germany, a place where the voice of the agency should be heard. I suppose they are doing a couple of side events. This is very important, but we need to be at the table of this important conversation in future years. So I would wrap up by saying that this formidable idea, which is the IAEA, has been in nuclear parlance in long-term operation for 60 years. Life extension is needed. We are not going to commission it. So these are a few ideas to how to go about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rafael. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Ali Heinonen. He's a senior advisor on science and nonproliferation at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Previously, he served as Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency and head of its Department of Safeguards. Prior to that, he was director at the agency's various operational divisions, such as inspector at the IAEA's office, overseas office in Tokyo. Prior to joining IAEA, he was a senior research officer at the Technical Research Center of Finland Reactor Laboratory, in charge of research and development related to nuclear waste solidification and disposal. He's also a senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Ali, welcome back to Wilson Center.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And thanks for having me here. This time it was a short trip because my office is just a few blocks away. So I don't need to come from very far. Actually, I would like to talk about these things in a very different way. First, I want to talk about how the IAEA will succeed also in the future. It is a successful organization until now. And I see there are three elements for that. The first one is the people. We have not talked here about the people at all. The next one is innovation, and the third one is openness. I think that these are the important things which the IAEA needs when next Director General takes the helm. Let me start from the staff. You know, it was 20th of December 2003, the tough year which Pierre mentioned yesterday. I was walking in Maria Hilferstrasse for Christmas shopping, and my telephone goes off, and I see that Mohammed is calling. I thought, oh, that's very sweet. He's wishing me a Merry Christmas. I opened it, and he said just that, come to my home. Oh, what it is? Oh, no, just come. So I left my daughter and gave extra money her and left her for shopping. And then I went to Mohammed's home in the 3rd district. I got there were 4 other people, and they told us that Muhammad Gaddafi has given up its nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction programs. His son talked about it yesterday, and now we wanted the IAEA to verify that the program has been dismantled. So that was Saturday, 20th. Then I went home. I took a phone. Then because now I had to put the team together. So I called to Nikolai, and I said, Nikolai, you know, we need to go to Libya Oh, yeah, yeah. I said, do you have a very firm Christmas plans? He said, yeah, I have something. He's a Russian, actually. He's more celebrating the Russian New Year. He said, yeah, I said, you know, we are going to travel. We will arrive there on Boxing Day, which was 4 days away, 5 days away. And, okay, when do we come back? I said, you know, sometimes early next year, because we don't really know how long this mission is. But I think that you will get back home by your New Year. This is what I call the commitment from the people there. And this is what needs to be maintained, that the people are ready to go to North Korea, stay 3 weeks there, no communication whatsoever, do that 4 or 5 times a year, and then get a bonus trip maybe once a year to Japan or some other much more nicer place. And this is how the agency works and should work, and this is, I think, one of the most important things the leadership of the IAEA and the Board of Governors need to maintain, that the people are ready and committed to do. And I gave you another example. Yesterday, I think it was John Carson who mentioned that let's not be overly legalistic in the IAEA, that yes, there must be a rule of law, but there needs to be also flexibility. And I give another example. And this is also to do with the people. So when Security Council did its 687 resolution on the 6th of April 1991, 1 month later, 35 IAEA inspectors were driving around in Baghdad. In 1 month time, based on this piece of paper, which came from Security Council. There were no meetings with the Board of Governors. Can we do? Should we do? How we go? What is the interpretation for this and this paragraph? 35 people together, rented an airplane. When the airplane left Vienna airport, we didn't have any landing permission to Baghdad. So we flew first to Bucharest, then to Cyprus. And then the idea was to go from Cyprus to Baghdad, but the air controllers in Habbaniya airport didn't respond, so then we flew to Kuwait and then waited there for a few hours and then finally got the permission to go there. 35 people, half of them were IAEA safeguards inspectors, half of these 35 people were experts from member states. So during that 1 month, we were able to put it together. We had 3 administrators in this group. So 35 people, 1 guy with a radio. There was no mobile phones on those days. He came from New Zealand. Then 1 British guy was with the cars, maintained our cars, because we had to drive ourselves. So we had Land Rovers left from the Gulf War, and we drove it ourselves. 12 cars. Dimitri Perikos in the first one, and I'm in the last one, and then we were communicating and trying to keep the convoy together. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. And then 1 administrator. Then I did my last trip to Baghdad about 1.5 years later. Team was, I think, 8 people. It was a fairly small team. The number of administrators was bigger than we, because we got all the UN services to take care. And I think that this is an example how the IAEA works in the UN systems. It's a very slim organization and it should be kept it. The administration needs to be narrow, and if the IAEA is able to prove that it manages its resources well, it will have those fundings which Heidi and Raphael has talked. And why this was possible? Because this was the people and the innovation. They were thinking differently. They got the task and they implemented the task. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why, for example, Safeguards has been successful. Or nuclear safety. Go back to Chernobyl in summer 1986, or was it 85. Hans Blix invited him to go to Chernobyl. And then this started the strengthening system of the IAEA safety system, conventions, guidelines, codes of conduct, and which Raphael has now innovated further. And this is the way to do. You have basic rules, then you look what is the best way to achieve your goal. Put the bureaucracy a little bit aside and use that capability of the IAEA and the system. And here I also want to emphasize that when here in the US people talk about the nuclear watchdog and IAEA, they actually don't always know that actually there's an IAEA board of governors, policy organs, general conference, and then it is the secretariat which has its mandate. I think that also secretariat has to maintain this innovation. And I give another example, not just from Safeguards, but when El Baradei was about to leave, we had this project 2020. What will be the IAEA challenge year 2020 and beyond, which was actually another 20 years. And when I prepared myself to this conference, actually I went and read through this document and look what happened and what didn't happen. And when I look at exactly how Rafael said, nuclear renaissance didn't show up because of a number of reasons, and one of them is Fukushima. But all the other elements actually there were taken. Safeguards was strengthened, nuclear security started to be strengthened, safety strengthened, and also TC got additional things. So there IAEA went, I think, very well. And I think that now one of the next steps is actually for the IAEA board and secretariat and maybe the director general candidates, they look where will be IAEA 10 years from now, 20 years from now, with various contingencies, if there will be an accident, how to deal with that, and also terrorism accident. Certainly you cannot plan for everything, so therefore there must be a flexibility, freedom of movement, not frozen, and I think that this is important. And yesterday someone complained that why Laura's diagram didn't have Fukushima. Actually, to be honest, it should have been, because I don't think that we have yet learned all the lessons from Fukushima. We have done a great job in having these peer reviews and all those. But when I look here, when I have now time to read the newspapers and watch the TV and internet, which I never had really time in IAEA. So a week ago, a little bit more than a week ago, the Finnish regulatory body told to the new power company, which is building a reactor there, that they will not get the construction permission before they can show that they have a safety culture in the organization. I think for me it's a bit shocking, you know. After all these events, the regulatory body finds that the utility doesn't have a safety culture. But it went beyond that. There are subcontractors and there is a reactor manufacturer. They are both Russian companies. The study also said that they don't have a safety culture which meets the Finnish and European standards. But this company is building reactors all over the world. So I think that there is something which we still need to do in the area of nuclear safety to make sure that at least these basic things are in order. And I can give you another example. And maybe Maurizio can tell also a little bit about it. A couple of weeks ago, it's a month ago, I noticed that the European newspapers had news about ruthenium isotope in air, radioactive ruthenium. Very small quantities, no danger for people in Europe. Where did it come from? And if you see ruthenium in Finland and Sweden and in France, there must be pretty powerful source somewhere in Europe or close to Europe. I never saw anything from IAEA to find out where this is ruthenium coming. Or a year earlier was krypton. Same way, all of a sudden, in the Scandinavian and Baltic countries, people see elevated amounts of krypton. These are not natural radionuclides. They are result of, they are man-made. And so it tells me that what might be there, that we have all this nice instructions, conventions, but they are not yet implemented. What to do? And this is my proposal number 3. I think that IAEA, based on these peer reviews and all the other information available, they could create a document like an annual nuclear safety implementation report, or every other year, based on this information, and see whether those are applied. And perhaps do the same also for nuclear security. And I give you another example on nuclear security, why it is not yet all these arrangements not fully implemented. IAEA is establishing a fuel bank in Kazakhstan, you all know, and we are all proud about it. But it got delayed. Why it got delayed? Because the Kazakhstan had to implement certain safety regulations. They have not done it. And Kazakhstan has been subject to US and other support close to 30 years. How this can happen? So I think that what we need, and this is a question also like they had in, we talked yesterday with Maurizio Boella, because I had to study in school Latin. So this Latin person, one of them, I don't bother you with Latin now, but who guards the guardians was the saying there. So we have utilities which use radioactive materials, run the facilities, build the reactors, hospitals and all. And then we have a regulatory body which controls them. And then there is a governmental oversight, maybe Prime Minister's office. Or I think we need more, because these nuclear accidents, and this is one of the lessons I think which we have not learned yet from Fukushima. I don't think that this safety and security can be only left to the individual countries to take care. And here I think that this kind of reporting system, if the IAEA can, based on this information which is available, and remember, Biological Weapons Convention actually has a procedure where when they come with the national reports, the Secretariat tries to make an assessment what is implemented and to which level. That we have this kind of report which tells that how also the security systems are implemented in practice. Is there a regulatory body? Do they have funding? Are they independent? Do they do their own independent inspections? This is all available there in the peer review papers, or in case of safety convention, it's also in the national reports. And IAEA can put this kind of safeguards implementation thing available. And I think it's a better measure, because then people feel perhaps more compelled also to implement in practice those codes. So, and I think that this is something which the IAEA should do now in years to come to maintain the credibility. Now I use word credibility. What is behind? IAEA is very famous. People think it's an impartial organization and it has been maintained. There has been some turbulences here and there and disputes, but this comes to the openness. For example, and now I take now a safeguards report as an example, and not these other two which I suggest, which should be similar material. There should be in these reports for public available how confident IAEA is about its conclusions. We used to have it in 1980s and 1990s. So detection probability was, for certain type of material, was at high detection probability. There was a frequency of inspections, and then there was a statement where those goals met partially or entirely. That type of information is not anymore in reports at all. And this is important, again, for countries looking their friends, allies, or as Laura said, enemies, that how they are doing, how is IAEA doing, how confident we are about these conclusions. And they are now certainly more difficult when we introduce this word peaceful use of atomic energy in that sense that the IAEA states that all nuclear material in a additional protocol statement, there's broader conclusion, is in peaceful use. First of all, I don't think IAEA, frankly speaking, can decide is this material now in peaceful use or not, because you really don't know the intention. It's been declared to you, you see it's there, it looks not non-peaceful material, but you never know what is the uranium metal can be, high-enriched uranium metal can be used for nuclear weapons, or plutonium can be quickly converted to plutonium metal. So you cannot say on peaceful use. So maybe we should change the system to more of this kind of dry, technical, non-political, factual conclusion. All nuclear material has been accounted for, then with a high probability, low probability, and there is no indication on undeclared activities or undeclared materials. And even that one can get some quantifier in reality. Intelligence agencies all over the world use it's highly likely, less likely. They have various ratings for the qualitative information. And I think that the IAEA has to do in order to be able to demonstrate that the safeguard system is solid and unbiased and doesn't favor anyone. And I think that this was pretty much what I wanted to say, with the exception that a remark more. We talk a lot about additional protocol on this, how important it is. And let's go to this crazy year of 2003 or peer, and particularly 2004, when we had all these non-proliferation cases. Actually, they were all found without additional protocol, traditional safeguards. Painstaking implementation of comprehensive safeguard assessment. This is the way. There were some intelligence information which came in certain cases, but all these historical things were done based on the provisions of safeguards agreement. In Libya, the implementation of additional protocol, then in the process, a little bit help, but not in reality, because the provisions, if you are very legalistic, additional protocol doesn't provide you with the history of nuclear material or nuclear program. It's from here onwards. So how did we do? We didn't call them special inspections. We didn't, as Laura correctly said, yes, they were not special inspections. They were not complementary acts. We just went there and did it and said that, look, guys, we have a problem here. We found that this material don't match. So we want to see Mr. X, Y, and Z. We want to go to this and this place. We never said that, we want to go there, Article 2A1 of the additional protocol, or say this was information-driven, task-driven. If they didn't want to say it, do it, then we said, sorry, sir, but actually we probably cannot come to the conclusion. And if you look, now I can tell history, if you look the broader conclusion from Libya, it actually dragged quite a long time, because they were not willing to tell when they started to work with the guys from the nuclear black market. So we spent 2 years to pursue them, that actually this work with AQCAN started in 1985 and not in 1995, as they said. So this is, again, I think it's a way that the Secretariat can use its initiative, tailor it for the task, not be too dogmatic, and there will be, most of the time, a good outcome. So I think that this is here where I stop, and I just want to pay still tribute to all the IAEA staff and safeguards inspectors, because they are the ones who are the ones who made the success. They are the ones, whose work was there when Mohammed and Yukia were walking on the in Oslo City Hall. Without the work of these people, they would have never been in City Hall. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Our final panelist is Joe Pilot. He's Program Manager in the Office of National Security and International Studies at Los Alamos. He's a global fellow, we're proud to say, at the Wilson Center, where we work together on the Non-Proliferation Forum. He served as representative of the Secretary of Defense to the fourth review conference of the NPT and as a senior advisor to the U.S. delegation at the 1995 NPT Review and Extension Conference. Dr. Pilot also served as representative of the Secretary of Defense to the Open Skies negotiation. He's held positions in the Pentagon and Congressional Research Service and has taught at Cornell, Georgetown, and the College of William & Mary. He's the co-editor of the Rutledge Handbook of Nuclear Proliferation and Policy and co-author of The Politics of Weapons Inspections. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rob. I should say at the outset that views I'm going to express are my own, not those of the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the NSA, or DOE. After two brilliant presentations by my colleagues, what I'd like to do is to step back and try to look at what are some of the lessons of the last 60 years and what they mean in terms of dealing with future challenges. If I have to look at it, I would argue that the IAEA and its safeguard system have evolved over 6 decades to meet the challenges of new technologies, new political undertakings, and new threats. And that the future of the agency will likely be determined by its ability to continue to evolve to meet new safeguards and other challenges in the future. Due in large part to innovations in non-destructive assay, continuous unattended monitoring, and other technologies and techniques in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the IAEA was able to respond in a flexible and rapid manner to unprecedented developments in South Africa, Iraq, and Libya in the 90s and early 2000s. Even though the agency was able to respond to these and other challenges at the time, it was recognized that more capabilities and authorities would be needed in the future. Today, the need to verify the implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, to think about how to prepare for dealing at some stage with North Korea, and to be able to respond to growing concerns about nuclear proliferation and terrorism, the agency is facing new challenges. For the last 2 decades, the agency has been transforming its safeguard system to address these and other issues. The state level concept is the latest manifestation of this decades-long process, a manifestation that has been challenged in recent years by Russia and other member states. The transformation of safeguards has been complicated by the fact that whatever the long-term impact of Fukushima on global interests in nuclear power, and I think that we've seen some bleak prospects indeed, IAEA safeguards responsibilities are expected to grow in the next decade on the basis of current plans and other factors, some of which may not be realized. The IAEA could be inspecting 3rd and even 4th generation reactors, enrichment plants using new technologies, pyroprocessing, and other new fuel cycle facilities, along with multinational fuel cycle centers and international fuel banks. In addition, regardless of growth, increasingly more and more reactors will be decommissioned, and spent fuel and stocks of separated plutonium are likely to grow. There will also be possibly more defense materials declared excess by nuclear weapon states that come under safeguards in the future. This increase in activity will place increasing strains on the agency, highlighting some existing gaps in safeguards and possibly opening new ones. The IAEA has certain issues today where safeguards requirements are not optimized, including time, cost, and capacity to analyze environmental samples, inline, not destructive assay to monitor and verify flows, enrichment levels, and the like at reprocessing plants, at enrichment plants, excuse me, monitoring holdup and waste containers at reprocessing plants. Beyond better handling these kinds of challenges, there are future proliferation challenges we can anticipate based on emerging and field cycle plans, including large and increasingly complex new facilities with high material throughputs, difficult to measure materials in harsh environments with high dose rates and temperatures. History shows that there'll be many safeguards challenges that we don't anticipate as well. Beyond these challenges of both transforming and strengthening safeguards, at the same time there are other challenges based on the uncertain impacts of new technologies, including additive manufacturing and questions about its control, and growing politicization at the agency, particularly in the board, differences over the exercise of existing authorities and the role of the additional protocol, as well as by the legacy of Iranian charges over the last decade against the IAEA and the emerging debate over the JCPOA. There have also been new and expanding rules for the agency, increasingly advocated by the agency, by member states, or by both in the areas of safety, security, arms control, and disarmament. I think we've heard about the safety and security issues. I think that the important takeaways from my perspective is that they are roles in which the agency is increasingly expected to participate, that there are significant limits on that participation, and that there will be budgetary and possibly institutional problems associated with those roles, areas where national responsibilities remain central and have been jealously guarded by states. There have also been advocates for a greater role of the agency in arms control and disarmament. It was envisaged in the Atoms for Peace speech that gave birth to the agency. It was embodied in the agency's statute, and it was intermittently pursued over the years. The issue has not been, though, in the forefront of thinking at the IAEA until recent years, where interest in a fissile material cutoff treaty and growing interest in disarmament caused by the Gang of Four and the Obama Prague speech revived the issue. At a time when there's little prospect of progress in these areas, however, the future's unclear. Many of the issues of institutional capabilities, resources, and attention raised by the growing roles in safety and security will undoubtedly be seen in this arena if geopolitical changes allow a reconsideration of the IAEA role in this area. Ultimately, future credibility and the prescribed effectiveness of the agency will be decided politically. The agency will be judged on its ability to address new and emerging challenges and on the implementation of its traditional and new roles and missions. It will be judged at a time of constrained budgets and of great uncertainty of nuclear issues across the board, including continuing concerns about addressing noncompliance, including the Syrian file in both the nuclear and the chemical areas. I think the chemical issues, as one of the questions from the floor yesterday suggested, have implications for the IAEA. The verification of the implementation of the JCPOA is likely to be a major challenge in the years ahead. both technically and politically. The reference to Russia's concern about the agency's mandate in verifying Section T is only one manifestation of a likely continuing political debate. The broader challenges of verifying weaponization, which involves dual-use capabilities that are very difficult to verify and sensitive information, in addition to the questions about the agency's mandate, are very significant. The emergence of new proliferation and terrorism threats, including the diffusion of new technologies, illicit trafficking, and the spread of nuclear knowledge via the internet. And for states, the appearance of a growing preference to pursue nuclear ambitions through nuclear latency and hedging create ambiguity that makes it very difficult for verification. The future of nuclear power and its impact on the agency's non-proliferation agenda is critical. If there is a downturn in nuclear power growth following from Fukushima and the competition of other issues, and a growing sense of limited benefits from pursuing nuclear energy to produce power, will it affect the desirability of technical cooperation and erode the Atoms for Peace bargain? I think that this is a critical issue for the agency, given the way in which trade-offs between safeguards and technical cooperation have played in the past. And finally, there's a question of the impact of the recently concluded ban treaty on the NPT regime, and particularly on safeguards. The verification provisions of the Prohibition Treaty, in my view, undermine long-standing efforts to universalize the additional protocol and establish it as the standard for safeguards. There are broader potential impacts, but in my view, those are the most concrete. In this environment, much of which is beyond the control of the agency, ensuring that the IAEA and its safeguards system are in a position to evolve to meet all challenges in the future goes beyond technical issues. But there are technical requirements that will have to be met if the agency is in position to do this. Efforts to ensure safeguards, research and development, the development of a new generation of inspectors and analysts, the people that Ali was talking about, and maintaining and improving IAEA's infrastructure are being pursued by the agency and member states. I would argue that more robust and sustainable commitment is needed. Technology R&D program should investigate next generation technologies to determine the best near-term detection, measurement, and forensic technologies, along with analytic tools and methods for development. Cheap and effective wide area environmental monitoring and novel detection technologies and techniques will be among the new tools required for meeting existing and anticipated challenges, particularly those associated with detecting undeclared facilities and activities. Proliferation resistance measures that enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of safeguards, so-called safeguards by design, could increase in importance, especially if nuclear energy expands, at least in some states. Integrating security and safety by design with safeguards by design offers the prospect of greater efficiency and effectiveness in the future. And the IAEA has been playing a role in this and could, in fact, play a broader role, but it will no doubt be challenged by key member states. In conclusion, At a time when nuclear issues are increasingly seen as global priorities, the IAEA faces new challenges. It's clear that the IAEA and its safeguard system will need to change in the future, as they've changed over the past 6 decades. Given today's and tomorrow's challenges and the great uncertainties surrounding the future of nuclear power today, there's an increased need for enhanced capabilities. There's also a need for the full implementation of existing authorities and probably the beginning of a exploration of whether new authorities are needed. I think that it should be evident that this evolution of safeguards must reinforce and be reinforced by other agency missions, particularly in safeguards and security, and by broader non-proliferation initiatives, managed and sustainable growth in nuclear energy, if that's possible, and other actions to address changing geopolitics. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We have about a little under 40 minutes for discussion. If speakers would please identify themselves. Who'd like to lead off? Yes, in front, Ambassador Abe.
Nobuyasu Abe from Japan. Oli Heinonen mentioned the openness of the IAEA's future. In that connection, we touched upon the question of confidentiality of information contained in the safeguard reports. My question is, who decides which is confidential information to be kept confidential? Perhaps the country inspected would request this and that should be kept confidential. The IAEA is at the mercy of inspected party, or IAEA can IAEA decide this is worth remaining confidential or not? And when there's a dispute, where does it go? In a national government, for example, the US, Japan, Freedom of Information Act, if the government refuses to release information, ultimately we can go to court. So is that kind of appeal system?
Should I answer now or?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is a good question, this confidentiality. And actually there are 2 parts to this. If we go to is it Article 5 of the Safeguards Agreement, where is the provision of confidence? And it's not defined there at all what is confidential. Just telling the information which is of proprietary nature or commercially important information. The IAEA, which comes to the IAEA's knowledge, this should be only disseminated with the people need to know basis. But then there is an addition at the very end of that sentence. There is also a sentence which says that the board can have all the information available to it, what it needs for its decision making and work. So that's one aspect. So it's pretty much then to the Secretariat to write. And what has happened over the years, actually, Secretariat has removed some of the information which used to be publicly available. And I give you a good example. Now, as a part of the JCPOA is the monitoring of uranium mines in Iran. IAEA has not told which mines Iran has submitted for the verification. It has not told how much yellow cake is produced in the concentration plant, but says that it's verifying it. At the same time, you take in your hand the IAEA Uranium Red Book, which IAEA every 2 years publishes together with the Nuclear Energy Agency of OECD. So you go to Iran, there is a list of mines in Iran, there is a list of their estimated annual production for next year, I think, and then actual production in last, was it 5 or 10 years. So it's available over there, but here it is confidential. And you can go to the list, and I think that one of those things with how the safeguards could be perhaps also enhanced, that I don't see why the IAEA cannot list the facilities which are subject to safeguards. What is confidential on that? Or which are the installations state has declared under the additional protocol? Mines, waste sites, centrifuge manufacture, rotor manufacturing plant. These are normally widely known anyway. But it has one benefit. Very often people talk about crowdsourcing and these various wonks who can find things. I think this is part of this openness which I talk, that the member states can see what is where it is. And IAEA used to have even a more detailed safeguards implementation report, which most of you don't know. It's a safeguards technical report, which actually tells every facility which was inspected during that calendar year. How many visits, what was the nuclear material, all that. For some reason, Secretariat has stopped the production of that in the last couple of years. Nobody in the board has complained, because actually very few countries ask it, because this was upon request. I remember my time that maybe it was Japan, Germany and US who asked, and nobody else. But this is when I talk about it. And certainly if there is a patent or information, and we need to go back to this when we talked yesterday about strategic points, access to only to certain parts of the process. Those were in the rosy dawn of nuclear energy, when these things were really secret. There was interest, a lot of commercial interest. Nowadays it's perhaps less and less on normal nuclear operations. Certainly novel technologies like bioprocessing or laser enrichment may be, in that sense, still commercially sensitive. But I think that this is something which the IAEA should really visit, and it will also remove a lot of criticism and unnecessary complaints about the safeguards activities. And it will be in the benefit of the states as well.
Okay. Question in the front?
Thank you, and thanks to the panelists who gave us a lot of food for thought. Both in this panel and yesterday, it was remarked that the more promotional side and the more regulatory side of the agency are inextricably linked. And Joe this morning pointed to the fact that if nuclear power would go down in many countries, that's an issue for the agency. But I think there's an even broader consideration that is of critical importance, and it is that nuclear technology has become a very mature technology. And my question is to the panelists whether that over time will be a lethal weakness, that as there's less and less of a role for the agency to assist states, because technology is well known, and Rafael has given part of the answer, that there should be more contact with companies who can do the same work. So the question is that a weakness for the agency, that we are talking about a technology that is so mature now? Thank you.
Who'd like to address that?
Well, I can say a couple of words mainly from a safeguards point of view. But, well, some things are mature, but small and medium-sized reactors, there are a lot of things which are coming, and I think that they will be also going to countries where nuclear knowledge is maybe not that wide. So there is agency's role, I think, changes there. It's more like what Rafael said, needs to train the people and build the infrastructure and build the regulatory bodies on those countries. And there, I think we talk of, he talked about, Joe, about the safeguards and security by design. I think that this is important, and when I look it back from my time, actually we had very little contact with the industry. It was always just everything was done, and you you go there. You are not part of the process from the very beginning. The only project which was constantly doing that was IMPRO, and it's still alive. And maybe for these other technologies, it might be good to have, but then we have to keep in our mind one thing. There won't be many reprocessing plants in next 20 years, I bet. There won't be very many pyroprocessing plants in next 20 years. I don't think there's an avalanche of enrichment plants either, because the growth in the nuclear, at this point of time, there's an overcapacity in enrichment. Urenco is even closing down some of the old cascades. So I think that we live now in a kind of fairly even system. Only the small reactors to developing countries, not very much new fuel fabrication capability. So what is, I think, happening is our real challenges will come if there is anything to do with the disarmament, because it will bring entirely different problem setting into the picture. There might be question, is there some sensitive proliferation, sensitive information? Amounts of materials will be huge. They will be very difficult to access, at least in the beginning, before they change the form. So I see the challenge is somewhere else. And then the other area is this need to confirm the absence of undeclared activities. And there we need to have thinking, because again, the problem is, at this point of time, is actually the turnover, the environmental samples. The average is, I think, is something like 3 months. If you want to have a breakout time, which is 1 year, you have a hard time to get it in environmental samples. And this comes with another aspect which we didn't address when we talk about the safeguards. And this is how to deal with the non-compliance cases. With General Hayden, I wrote a piece to Washington Post 2 years ago, where we looked how the national intelligence system deals with this kind of thing, and what are the procedures in the IAEA, how long it will take for the Secretariat really to put on the table that a case that we have a big problem, in particular if the country is about to go to the nuclear weapons. It's a different thing if there's some accountancy problem in the early parts of the fuel cycle. And this is still months. We came to the conclusion that nothing dramatic can be done in a time which is shorter than 6 months.
Others care to comment on that? Or? Okay. Yes. Well.
I wanted to talk about two questions overhanging the agency's future, although I think they've both been mentioned. One is the lessons of Syria, but also of is that on? Right. Okay. One is the Russian attitudes and behavior, which have been mentioned as not necessarily always sympathetic to the agency or equivalent organizations. They seem to have developed a habit of criticizing inspectors' integrity and professional competence again and again. And if that continues as a systematic diplomatic tactic, what is the agency going to do about that? The second point is the ban treaty. There is going to be a ban treaty. It's signed, it will be ratified, whatever we think of it, and that will call for the creation of what they call a CIA, a competent international authority, which will be doing some of the same things that the agency is, perhaps. It will be fishing in the same pool for expertise. There will be questions about which function should the IAEA want to continue to do and maybe to move into, or whether the IAEA should be completely detached from all the new functions that the ban treaty will call forth. And I wonder what thinking has been done about that.
If I may start.
Please,
on
Rafael.
on the first issue of the attitudes of Russia or any other country that may be, from time to time playing the role of the spoiler or because it depends. Now we forget, but over the past decade or so, it was very difficult to work the board because of attitudes from Iran or Syria, or I mean, there's a pre and post GCPOA Iran. Nowadays you don't hear them much, which is rather unusual for what we have to see in the past. So my impression is that the work, and I think you see this coming again and again, the work and the dynamics of the board of governors needs a lot of tending to, and I'm not sure whether this has been the case. When I was there, but when one reads the spirit of the board in the past, the brethren, the nuclear founding fathers, the way they, doesn't mean that they were agreeing on things, but there was a very proactive and active interaction between board, director general on certain key issues, and I think this is what needs to be, I believe, looked at again. In terms of Russia, one interesting thing is that they insist more and more on the role of the policy-making organs. So I think it is there that you have to go and engage them. What is it that they mean by that? They talk about the General Conference resolutions as the source of legitimacy to some of the activities of the board, which is true, but in the past, at least in my experience, was not taken, shall I say it, very seriously. I mean, you had the resolution and people would go about the normal business. Now they are insisting much more on the fact that there should be a direct, recognizable traceability between mandates emerging or emanating from GC resolutions and program delivery and the program and budget, which is, if not new, a new way to do things. So I think they should be engaged at that level. Perhaps you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So Rafael explained very well how the board needs to be engaged. But then the other part, if you look the Russian complaints, and I'm talking now particularly the chemical samples from Syria. So I think that it's important, IAEA, in order to avoid this kind of confrontation, tell exactly what is done, how it is done, what is the confidence level, and then the member state can judge based on those facts, are those Russian complaints valid or not? And I think that will reduce some of the complaints. And then the important thing is, someone asked me now that, what about now that in Syria this Al-Kibar reactor is actually under the control of US friendly forces, that whether one should go there, that maybe the US military can go or someone else. I said that I advise against it. If you go with the IAEA, because it's important to show that it's the IAEA and a multilateral organization which takes the sample. It has its credibility. You cannot delegate it to one of the parties. Then, ban treaty. The verification task there, routine verification task. I think that this is IAEA safeguard, so it doesn't need to delegate anything to anyone. IAEA should not delegate because non-proliferation treaty is still in force, and the IAEA is the implementing organization, and board is the authority to judge in compliance. Then there are some additional tasks there which come for the dismantlement. If the country which joins that and dismantles its nuclear weapons, then one has to really to look, whether your CIA takes it or whether IAEA takes it. But I don't think that I would spend too much effort and time to plan for that organization, because I don't think it's there tomorrow.
I think on the Russian question, I would agree with Raphael that we need to do engagement and to explore Russian feelings. My overall concern is that for as long as the IAEA has existed, we have had mutual interests with the Soviet Union and Russia on the full range of nuclear issues and avoiding nuclear dangers. I think that there's been some question over the last 10 years in particular about whether the Russians are redefining interests in ways that that no longer are consistent with the U.S. views and I think the international community's views of what constitute key nuclear dangers. And I think that one of the tasks of the engagement that Raphael proposes would be to fully explore what level of mutual interests remain and what level of interest can we restore. I think that nuclear security is an area where I think there is some possibility to revive cooperative patterns and dialogue, and we'll have to just look into that. On the, I think that in similar fashion, I have my reaction to the so-called CIA is similar to Ali's, but I think that there is another issue. I don't think we're going to see any significant moves by a nuclear power to join the ban treaty or to undertake the actions that would be called for. But if and when we do, we have some technical problems in terms of understanding how to do the problem. We've been working on it for over 2 decades, and we still don't have full technical solutions to how to deal with dismantlement because of issues like authentication and the ability to ensure that some item being removed and ultimately disposed of is truly a nuclear weapon. And I think that there's nothing in the ban treaty's language that suggests any way of addressing that issue, and we'll have to see how that issue develops over time in technical communities that continue to express interest in it. I think that the unfortunate model that the ban treaty language suggests is the South African model, which in many ways is a tremendous success story. But if you look at the what was done to verify what happened in South Africa, the question is whether you would want to see that as the model for global disarmament, given the uncertainties that remained after they dismantled their own weapons and then opened the field to the IAEA as well as to certain states that helped in the disarmament effort. I mean, in many ways, the confidence that we had in South African disarmament, at least in the immediate period following it, was due more to the political developments of the Mandela-led regime than to the levels of technical confidence we had, although the IAEA did a brilliant job in terms of addressing that very difficult issue.
Maybe I add something. South African model we need to keep in our mind. nuclear weapons program was very small, was just 6 weapons. But you are talking about hundreds or thousands, then these uncertainties kick in. The other difference is that it's easier to deal with the uranium versus plutonium. Because if the program is long, like starts from somewhere 1950s, actually it's not technically possible to make a full accountancy of that plutonium. It's impossible. Ever. Because first of all, those days the record keeping was a little bit not that accurate. Plutonium decays, the half-life for plutonium-241 is 14 years. So you need to go through those 50 or 60 years of history in a big country and do all the adjustments to those records and wastes and whatever you have. So it's a mission impossible. So I think one should be really careful, you know, in thinking that yes, they are, but when it comes to we will implement it. I think that the really has to think at what is the objective here, and there may be some other assurances how these uncertainties can be dealt with, rather than try to achieve it with measurements and accountancy only.
Well, in a panel on challenges and prospects, I can't resist asking about directly about Iran and North Korea. I mean, the President of the United States is in North Korea a week or weeks ago, he decertified the JCPOA. And I'd like to get the panel's assessment of kind of where we're at on that. On Iran, there's a focus on what will happen at the end of the JCPOA when the constraints start coming off. I'd be interested in the view of the panel on if Iran is within the treaty, stays within the treaty and the additional protocol and the kind of all that entails, with the IAEA role in kind of monitoring that, you know, would the international community, what is the degree of confidence the international community would, the confidence the international community could have of Iran's persisting non-nuclear, you know, intentions. And then on North Korea, a country that was in the treaty withdrew. IAEA inspectors were there, and they were withdrawn, expelled. With a very mature program, kind of what does the North Korean case tell us about what a determined proliferator can do to acquire these capabilities through kind of black markets? And if in the very kind of narrowing bad options with North Korea, which as the Trump administration officials said, just because the options are lousy doesn't mean we're not going to take one. You have kind of bomb, negotiate, contain, deter. The window on diplomacy is closing. It's focusing on a freeze. Given where North Korea is at in the technology side, if a freeze were to be negotiated, I mean, in one aspect could be ballistic missile and other weapons usable material, what kind of role could the IAEA play in a kind of freeze scenario if it were to come to fruition, which admittedly is a long shot right now? And we've got 15 minutes to lunch, so.
Okay, good. So I start with North Korea, which is the easy case. And draw from the lessons from the past. Agreed framework and then the monitoring scheme which was running 2007-2009. Two basic things. First is that the verification scheme needs to be very different. IAEA was very limited. You know, at the agreed framework, everything was confined to Nyon-Bion facilities, and then a couple of locations outside, but basically Nyon-Bion. Material was monitored that they don't take it away, but there was no actual verification of material. They were done on ad hoc basis. The agreement in 2007 to 2009 was even worse. This was actually just to see that these nuclear installations don't operate. And here comes that was the first lesson, that this needs to be widened, because at the time of the agreed framework, this is time when they developed further their plutonium metallurgy. They had another place to play with that. They proudly showed that to us when we went back in 2007. They were very proud of the achievements they made. So access has to be anytime, any place, or has to be really wide, using modern technologies. Then the second thing is the freeze. I don't think that I would be happy if it is just a freeze. There should be front-end dismantlement or disablement, because that's what went wrong also in the agreed framework. That's why they were ready to start so quickly. When the IAEA was kicked out in December 2002, 6 years later was 4 years later was the first nuclear test. So they had prepared everything ready, and the only thing which was missing was the plutonium, and they processed it quickly. So we need to have all these other measures there that they cannot restore the reprocessing and enrichment and maybe weapon manufacturing as quickly as they did, which means there is a front end, not disablement, but dismantlement, so that there is hot cells are full of concrete or something like that. These are the first things. And then the inspectorate needs to really have an access and use modern technologies, drones and others which are not used to monitor the places. Then Iran. I think that President Obama said that when Iran comes to year 12 or 13, the breakout time is few weeks. That's good to remember. And now that is then now 10 years away. If we want to negotiate better arrangements and make the breakout time longer for that year 13, even if IAEA detects it, let's say in 1 week time or few days time, that one now changes the configuration of cascades, it's too late. It's too late because of the enrichment capacity which is available. And these breakout times have to take into another aspect which was conveniently left out, which is stock of the unused centrifuges which can be installed very quickly. So yes, it's good to have 300 kilograms of maximum low energy uranium, but if you put at the same time, 1 or 2 cascades per week, new centrifuges which capacity is maybe 10 times, 15 times more powerful, you just need a couple of thousand of them, and your breakdown time comes to somewhere to 1 month. So I think we need to avoid that, because I don't think that there is any legitimate, peaceful need for an enrichment program like that, with that technology which we have. And it doesn't need that you need to necessarily to renegotiate JCPOA. Iran just doesn't use all its rights under the JCPOA. It agrees with the P5+1 that actually we are not going to put that many centrifuges there. We are not going to build IR8s after year 8. Yes, we have do R&D, we maintain our skills, but we don't build them. Then you have this, can have that 1 year, which is reasonable, and 6 months will go to the decision making anyway if they start to leave their obligations. And then the other part is then undeclared activities. So I think at the IAEA reporting should be much more open, tell the places which were gone. You don't need to put their economics or any big secrets in from proprietary point of view, but this is the way international community can follow them, and this gives then better assurances on the absence of undeclared activities, which is still there. And if you have a country which is able to make centrifuges, which has equipment in other institutes than what IAEA is monitoring, is able to make those centrifuges in some other workshops, this risk for undeclared production, which is a historical fact in Iran, will loom there all the time. So I think that only by restriction of the enrichment program and good access for the IAEA and distribution of information is the way to do it. And much of the reporting can be actually decided by the IAEA Board of Governors. I mentioned Article 5. So the board can ask more information to be available for it in order to make its independent conclusion how IAEA Secretariat is implementing and Iran are implementing this. And then my personal view is that the competent authority here is for the implementation of the safeguards, and even JCPOA extra measures is the IAEA, not the P5 or Joint Commission. Because once this UN resolution came, it was given to the IAEA, so they are the ones who are the judges whether it's done properly or not, based on the long experience which IAEA has on these issues. There was never ever discussion when 687 was there that to whom IAEA should go to ask the advice. Security Council, no, it was the IAEA who did it. South Africa, same thing, entirely ad hoc arrangement. Who was the judge? It was IAEA.
Joe?
I think Ali has laid out a whole host of real issues. Let me just get to the question of what role the IAEA would have if there were some possibility of action in North Korea, and at the time when the sunset provisions start kicking in terms of the JCPOA. I think in both cases, for reasons that Ali suggested, and perhaps even other reasons, the IAEA will be in a difficult position. And I think that we really do need to think about preparing a strategy for taking a staged set of actions in North Korea if there is a diplomatic movement. I think one of the issues is, in most discussions of a freeze, it's a nuclear testing and missile testing freeze, and the IAEA would probably have no role in that. But if IAEA feet get on the ground in North Korea, we'll need to have a strategy, and a strategy that guides diplomacy in terms of any kind of arrangements about what the IAEA should be doing, and what they'll need to do. I mean, it's been a long time since they've last been in North Korea, and we'll need to fix that. With regard to the sunset provisions, I think one of the elements of the problem is that the changes in the way that Iran will be treated at the time of the sunset provisions aren't tied in the JCPOA to changes in Iranian behavior. And that means that if we haven't arranged new provisions to deal with these problems, the IAEA will be in an untenable position at that time.
May I add something which, not on the technical level, and I think what Ollie and Joe have said is very illuminating. The last trace of communication the DPRK had directly, there had been, of course, directly, between the DPRK regime and the agency happened in 2012, immediately after the Leap Day statements, as you may recall. And it's interesting because at that time we received a letter inviting the agency to come and start talking. This is, it's not confidential, it's public information. And DG Amano responded to that, saying that we were going to start working on that. And then happened what happened. They had a lunch, I believe, and the United States, who was one of the two parties, if you remember, was that this was no longer six party. This was U.S. DPRK, decided that the conditions of of course, Leap Day statements. These were two parallel statements. It was quite unusual in the way it was presented. It was two parallel, not agreed statements. But I think it's interesting because it indicates and confirms that in their minds, it is, of course, through the IAEA that any monitoring or verification is to be conducted. I think it's a perhaps not enough explored piece of information, but it's interesting when you read what the Leap Day statement, agreed statement or non-agreed statement said, and the fact that DPRK was asking the agency to start talking on how to do that. The other comment I would like to make has to do with what Ollie was explaining about confidentiality. I think it's interesting to see that in the last phases of the pre-JCPOA agreement and after that, Iran was, in their interventions to the board and in the briefings, were addressing this issue abundantly, saying that the reports were too long and there was far too superfluous information that had nothing to do with the purpose. So I think it's important to reassert these authorities, as Ollie was reminding us, because there is nothing, if one is left with the impression that the agency was excessive in what it was informing and that there is some boundaries in terms of confidentiality that were being exceeded, then I think this could be a complication also for future cases. So this idea that the confidentiality exists as a general concept, and it is up to the to safeguards to determine what should be in the reports or not. So I wanted to add it.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you as well, Ali and Joe. This has been an excellent panel, part of, I think, a very rich discussion over the last day and a half. Lunch beckons us in the dining room. Really just on behalf of the Wilson Center and our Nuclear Proliferation International History Project and the Los Alamos National Laboratory, our partner, thank you all for attending. Events such as these just don't happen. I'd like to thank Joyce Ortega Tapia out in Los Alamos and Evan Pokulski and his team here in Washington for making this conference possible. And of course, to the person who conceived and put the whole program together, Joe Pilat. Please join me in thanking everyone involved.